The radio crackled with desperation at 3:47 a.m. 12 souls trapped on a remote Alaskan mountain, temperatures dropping to -30 degrees, and every rescue helicopter grounded due to the worst blizzard in decades. The dispatcher's voice cut through the static. "We need someone crazy enough to fly in this weather." In a small hangar outside Anchorage, Sarah Mitchell pulled on her flight jacket, ignoring the voices that had haunted her for 15 years. The same voices that said women couldn't handle the pressure. The same voices that questioned her every decision. The same voices that nearly cost her everything she'd worked for. Tonight, those voices would finally be silenced. What happened next would prove that sometimes the person everyone doubts becomes the only one capable of doing the impossible. This is the story of how a woman they called too emotional to fly became the pilot who redefined what courage looks like at 30,000 feet. Sarah Mitchell was 8 years old when she first saw her father's airplane sitting in their family's modest hangar in rural Montana. The Cessna 172 looked enormous to her young eyes, its silver wings stretching like the arms of a giant bird frozen in time. Her father, Tom Mitchell, had been a bush pilot for 23 years, flying supplies to remote mining camps and emergency medical evacuations across the rugged terrain of the American Northwest. "Can I touch it, Daddy?" Sarah asked, her small hand reaching toward the propeller. Tom smiled, lifting his daughter onto his shoulders so she could see into the cockpit. "One day, you might be the one flying her," he said, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. The hangar smelled of aviation fuel and old leather, scents that would become as familiar to Sarah as her mother's cooking. Every evening after school, she would run to the hangar where her father performed maintenance checks, cleaned the instruments, and planned his next day's routes. She absorbed every detail, memorizing the function of each gauge, switch, and lever. By age 10, Sarah could identify aircraft by sound alone. The deep rumble of a twin-engine Beechcraft, the high whine of a Piper Cherokee, the distinctive chop of helicopter rotors cutting through mountain air. Her bedroom walls were covered with aviation posters, and her bookshelf held every pilot's manual and flight training guide she could find at the local library. Her mother, Linda, worried about Sarah's obsession. "It's dangerous work, honey," she would say, watching her daughter study weather patterns and navigation charts with the intensity of a seasoned meteorologist. "Maybe you should think about becoming a teacher or a nurse." But Sarah's dreams had already taken flight. She spent hours building model airplanes, each one meticulously painted and assembled according to the manufacturer's specifications. She learned about lift and drag, thrust and weight, the four fundamental forces that govern flight. When her classmates played with dolls or video games, Sarah was calculating fuel consumption rates and studying aerodynamic principles. Her father encouraged her passion, teaching her to read aviation weather reports and understand the complex language of air traffic control. During summer breaks, he would take her on supply runs to remote locations, letting her wear a headset and listen to radio communications between aircraft and control towers. On her 12th birthday, Tom surprised Sarah with her first flying lesson. They climbed into the Cessna together, and with her father's hands guiding hers, Sarah felt the control yoke respond to her touch for the first time. The airplane lifted off the runway, and as the Montana landscape spread beneath them like a living map, Sarah knew she had found her calling. "How does it feel?" Tom asked through the intercom. "Like coming home," Sarah replied, her voice filled with wonder. But not everyone shared her enthusiasm. At school, her male classmates would snicker when she talked about becoming a pilot. "Girls can't fly planes," 12-year-old Jake Hendricks told her during lunch one day. "My dad says women are too emotional to handle the pressure." Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment and anger, but she didn't back down. "My dad says the best pilots are the ones who can stay calm under pressure, and women are naturally better at that," she shot back. The conversation marked the beginning of a pattern that would follow Sarah throughout her youth. Teachers would discourage her from taking advanced mathematics and physics courses, suggesting she focus on more appropriate subjects like home economics or art. Guidance counselors would redirect her career discussions toward traditional female professions. Even some of her father's pilot friends expressed skepticism. "Tom, you sure you want to encourage this?" asked Bill Crawford, a veteran flight instructor with over 30 years of experience. "Aviation's a tough business for men, let alone women. She's going to face a lot of resistance." But Tom believed in his daughter's abilities. He had watched her natural aptitude for spatial reasoning, her ability to remain calm in turbulent weather, and her meticulous attention to detail. He knew Sarah possessed the qualities that separated good pilots from great ones. When Sarah turned 14, she enrolled in the local community college's ground school program, the youngest student in her class by 4 years. The instructor, Robert Hayes, initially questioned whether she was serious about aviation or just going through a phase. "Flying isn't a hobby," he told the class on the first day. "It requires absolute commitment, perfect judgment, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions in seconds. If anyone here isn't completely dedicated to this pursuit, now would be a good time to leave." Sarah remained seated while 2 older students quietly gathered their books and left. She had no intention of going anywhere. The ground school curriculum covered navigation, meteorology, federal aviation regulations, and aerodynamics. Sarah excelled in every subject, often scoring higher than students twice her age. She memorized airspace classifications, radio procedures, and emergency protocols with remarkable efficiency. Her favorite subject was weather interpretation. Understanding how atmospheric conditions affected flight safety fascinated her. She learned to read surface analysis charts, recognize the formation of dangerous weather patterns, and calculate the impact of wind conditions on aircraft performance. During practical exercises, Sarah demonstrated an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional navigation that impressed her instructors. While other students struggled with complex flight planning calculations, she would complete them quickly and accurately, often helping classmates who had fallen behind. "She has natural spatial intelligence," Robert Hayes told Tom after one particularly challenging lesson. "I've taught hundreds of students, and I've rarely seen someone grasp these concepts so quickly." As Sarah progressed through ground school, her confidence grew, but so did the challenges she faced. Some male students resented her success, making comments about special treatment or suggesting that her father was providing unfair assistance. A few even went so far as to complain to the instructor about grade curves, implying that Sarah's performance was somehow artificial. The criticism only strengthened Sarah's determination. She began staying after class to ask additional questions, volunteering for extra credit projects, and spending weekends at the airport observing flight operations. She wanted to prove beyond any doubt that her success was earned through hard work and natural ability. Her dedication paid off when she passed the written examination for her private pilot license with a score of 98%, the highest in her class's history. The achievement felt hollow, however, when she overheard one of her classmates telling another, "I bet her dad gave her the answers." That evening, Sarah sat in the hangar with her father, tears of frustration streaming down her face. "It doesn't matter what I do," she said. "They'll never accept that I belong here." Tom placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Sarah, discrimination isn't about your abilities. It's about their fear. They're afraid that if you succeed, it challenges everything they believe about who belongs in aviation. But you can't let their fear become your limitation." Those words would echo in Sarah's mind throughout the challenges that lay ahead. As she prepared for her first solo flight, scheduled for the following month, she knew that each milestone would be scrutinized more carefully than those of her male counterparts. She would have to be not just as good as the men in her field, but better. The hangar fell quiet except for the distant sound of wind rushing through the Montana mountains. Sarah looked up at the Cessna, its familiar silhouette now representing both her greatest dream and her most daunting challenge. She had no way of knowing that the skills she was developing and the resilience she was building would one day save 12 lives in conditions that would ground every other pilot in Alaska. But on that quiet evening in rural Montana, surrounded by the smell of aviation fuel and the promise of open skies, Sarah Mitchell made a silent vow. She would become the best pilot she could possibly be, not to prove anything to those who doubted her, but to honor the trust her father had placed in her dreams and to prepare herself for whatever challenges aviation might bring. The first chapter of her journey was complete. The real test was yet to come. The morning of Sarah's first solo flight arrived with crystal clear skies and gentle winds, perfect conditions for a milestone that every pilot remembers for life. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, practicing emergency procedures, perfecting her radio communications, and demonstrating to her flight instructor that she could safely operate an aircraft without supervision. Robert Hayes, who had transitioned from ground school instructor to flight instructor, walked around the Cessna with Sarah for the pre-flight inspection. His initial skepticism about her commitment had long since disappeared, replaced by respect for her methodical approach to aviation and her exceptional learning curve. "Remember," he said as they completed their examination of the aircraft's control surfaces, "this is just another flight. You've done everything correctly dozens of times with me in the cockpit. Today, you're simply doing it alone." Sarah nodded, though her heart was racing with excitement and nervous energy. She had dreamed of this moment for 6 years, and now it was finally happening. As she climbed into the pilot's seat and adjusted the controls, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. For the first time, she would be the sole person responsible for the safe operation of an aircraft. The engine started smoothly, and Sarah began her taxi to the runway, following the familiar procedures she had practiced countless times. Her radio communications were crisp and professional as she requested clearance for takeoff. The control tower, familiar with the local flight school's operations, granted permission immediately. As the Cessna accelerated down the runway and lifted into the morning air, Sarah experienced a moment of pure euphoria. She was flying solo, controlling every aspect of the aircraft's movement through the three-dimensional space around her. The sensation was both liberating and sobering, a reminder of the enormous responsibility that came with pilot certification. The flight pattern she had practiced dozens of times felt different without an instructor beside her. Every decision was hers alone, from altitude adjustments to radio calls to traffic avoidance. She completed 3 perfect touch-and-go landings, each one building her confidence and cementing her understanding of aircraft control. When she finally shut down the engine and climbed out of the cockpit, a small crowd had gathered to congratulate her. Her father was there, beaming with pride, along with several other local pilots who had watched her progress through flight training. Even some of the students who had initially questioned her abilities offered genuine congratulations. But the celebration was tempered by an incident that occurred later that afternoon. Sarah was reviewing her logbook entries when she overheard a conversation between 2 visiting pilots at the flight school's office. "I can't believe they're letting teenage girls fly solo now," one of them said. "What happens when she has her period during an emergency? Women are too emotionally unstable for aviation." The other pilot laughed. "Give it 6 months. She'll probably crash or get scared and give up flying altogether." Sarah felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. She had just achieved one of aviation's most significant milestones, demonstrating skill and judgment that many pilots twice her age struggled to develop. Yet these men dismissed her accomplishment based purely on her gender. Her father, who had also heard the conversation, approached the 2 pilots directly. "Gentlemen, that young woman just completed a solo flight with better precision and professionalism than most pilots achieve in their first year of flying. You might want to check your assumptions at the door." The confrontation was brief, but telling. Sarah realized that her father wouldn't always be there to defend her, and that she would need to develop the mental toughness to handle criticism and discrimination on her own. The incident motivated her to excel even more dramatically, to build a record of achievement that would be impossible to dismiss. Over the following months, Sarah threw herself into advanced flight training with unprecedented intensity. She earned her private pilot license on her 16th birthday, the minimum age allowed by federal regulations, and immediately began working toward her commercial rating. Her studying expanded beyond basic flight operations to include complex aircraft systems, advanced meteorology, and specialized flying techniques. She also began working part-time at the local airport, fueling aircraft, cleaning hangars, and assisting with maintenance operations. The job provided valuable exposure to different types of aircraft and allowed her to observe the daily operations of a busy aviation facility. More importantly, it helped her build relationships with professional pilots who could provide mentorship and career guidance. One of these relationships proved particularly influential. Captain Janet Morrison was a former military pilot who now flew cargo operations throughout the western United States. She was one of only 3 female pilots based at the airport, and her reputation for skill and professionalism was unquestioned among the aviation community. Janet took Sarah under her wing, providing guidance on career planning and sharing insights about the challenges women faced in commercial aviation. "The industry is changing," she told Sarah during one of their conversations. "But it's changing slowly, and you'll face obstacles that male pilots never encounter. The key is to be so good at what you do that they can't ignore you." Under Janet's mentorship, Sarah began flying more complex aircraft and learning advanced techniques like instrument approaches, mountain flying, and short field operations. She developed exceptional skills in challenging conditions, learning to land safely on unpaved strips, navigate through mountainous terrain, and operate efficiently in variable weather conditions. Her reputation as a skilled and reliable pilot began to spread throughout the regional aviation community. Other pilots started requesting her assistance with challenging flights, recognizing her ability to maintain composure under pressure and her meticulous attention to safety protocols. However, not all interactions were positive. During her commercial pilot check ride, the examiner, an older man with obvious skepticism about female pilots, subjected her to an unusually rigorous examination. He extended the oral portion of the test for nearly 3 hours, asking detailed questions about regulations, emergency procedures, and aircraft systems that went far beyond the normal scope of evaluation. "I want to make sure you really know this material," he told her during a brief break. "I can't afford to pass someone who might not be ready for the responsibilities of commercial aviation." Sarah answered every question correctly, demonstrating knowledge that impressed even the skeptical examiner. During the flight portion of the test, she executed every maneuver with precision and professionalism that exceeded the required standards. When the examiner finally signed her temporary certificate, he admitted that her performance had been exceptional. "I'll be honest," he said as they completed the paperwork. "I didn't expect you to do as well as you did. You've proven that you belong here." The backhanded compliment stung, but Sarah had learned to accept such interactions as part of her journey in aviation. She was developing the thick skin necessary to succeed in a male-dominated industry while maintaining her passion for flying and her commitment to excellence. At 18, Sarah enrolled in an aeronautical science program at a major university, one of only 12 women in a class of over 200 students. The academic environment proved even more challenging than flight training, with professors who seemed surprised by her presence and classmates who often excluded her from study groups and social activities. Her coursework covered advanced topics like aircraft design, airline operations, and aviation management. She excelled academically while continuing to build flight experience during summers and school breaks. Her logbook grew to include increasingly complex aircraft types and challenging flying conditions. During her junior year, Sarah applied for internships with major airlines and charter operations. Despite her excellent academic record and extensive flight experience, she faced rejection after rejection. Personnel managers would cite various reasons for their decisions, but the pattern was clear. They weren't ready to hire female pilots for positions traditionally held by men. The rejections were devastating, but they also strengthened Sarah's resolve. She decided to focus on building experience in specialized areas of aviation where her skills would be most valued. She earned additional ratings for seaplane operations, mountain flying, and emergency medical services, developing expertise in the type of challenging flying that many pilots avoided. Her breakthrough came during her senior year, when a small charter operation in Alaska offered her a position flying supply runs to remote locations. The job was dangerous, demanding, and poorly paid, but it provided the type of experience that would set her apart from other pilots. Without hesitation, Sarah accepted the offer. As she prepared to move to Alaska and begin her professional career, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had faced discrimination, skepticism, and outright hostility, but she had also discovered her own strength and determination. The skills she was developing and the resilience she was building would soon be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. The hangar in Montana, where her aviation dreams had first taken flight, seemed like a lifetime away. But the lessons her father had taught her about perseverance and excellence remained central to her approach to flying. She was ready to prove herself in one of aviation's most challenging environments, though she had no idea that her opportunity would come in the form of a desperate rescue mission that would test every skill she had learned. Alaska was waiting, and with it, the chance to show the world what she was truly capable of achieving. The twin-engine Cessna 402 descended through low clouds toward Fairbanks, Alaska, carrying Sarah Mitchell toward the next chapter of her aviation career. Below, the vast Alaskan wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions, a landscape so remote and unforgiving that it tested the limits of both aircraft and pilot capabilities. As the wheels touched down on the snow-covered runway, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension about the challenges that lay ahead. Northwind Aviation operated out of a modest hangar on the edge of Fairbanks International Airport, specializing in cargo and passenger service to remote communities throughout interior Alaska. The company's fleet consisted of 6 aircraft, ranging from single-engine Cessnas to a converted DC, 3 used for heavy cargo operations. The pilots who worked for Northwind were experienced professionals who understood that Alaskan flying demanded skills and judgment that went far beyond normal aviation requirements. Sarah's new employer, Jack Patterson, was a gruff former military pilot who had been flying in Alaska for over 20 years. When he first interviewed Sarah by phone, his skepticism about hiring a young woman for such demanding work was apparent. However, her flight experience and additional ratings had impressed him enough to offer her a trial position. "This isn't Montana flying," Jack warned her during their first meeting. "Up here, weather changes in minutes, not hours. Landing strips are often just gravel bars or frozen lakes. If you make a mistake, help might be days away, assuming anyone can even find you. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I've been preparing for this kind of flying my entire career. I understand the risks, and I'm ready to handle them." Jack studied her for a long moment before nodding. "We'll see. You'll start with supply runs to establish strips. If you prove yourself there, we'll move you up to more challenging destinations." Sarah's first assignment was flying medical supplies and food to a remote research station near Denali National Park. The destination was a 2,800-foot gravel strip surrounded by mountains, requiring precise navigation and careful attention to weather conditions. She spent hours studying sectional charts, calculating fuel requirements, and reviewing emergency procedures. The morning of her first flight, she performed an extensive pre-flight inspection of the Cessna 206 she would be flying. The aircraft was equipped with specialized cold weather modifications, including engine heaters, emergency survival gear, and communication equipment designed for remote area operations. Every piece of equipment could mean the difference between life and death in Alaskan conditions. The flight to the research station tested every skill Sarah had developed during her aviation training. She navigated through mountain passes where sudden downdraft could slam an aircraft into the ground without warning. Weather conditions changed rapidly, forcing her to make constant adjustments to her flight plan and altitude. When she finally spotted the gravel strip carved into the side of a mountain valley, Sarah felt a surge of accomplishment. The landing approach required precise speed and altitude control to avoid the steep terrain surrounding the runway. She touched down smoothly, delivering her cargo safely despite conditions that would have challenged pilots with decades more experience. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the research station's lead scientist, was surprised to see a young woman emerge from the cockpit. "I wasn't expecting someone so young," she said as they unloaded medical supplies. "How long have you been flying in Alaska?" "This is my first week," Sarah replied honestly. "But I've been preparing for this type of flying for years." Dr. Hayes looked concerned. "Alaska doesn't forgive inexperience. Make sure you're getting proper mentoring from the senior pilots." The advice proved prescient. Over the following weeks, Sarah learned that Alaska's aviation community was tight-knit and highly protective of its standards. Pilots who couldn't handle the unique challenges of Arctic flying were quickly identified and encouraged to find work elsewhere. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. Her second assignment was more challenging, transporting a seriously injured logger from a remote camp to the hospital in Fairbanks. The weather was marginal, with low clouds and snow showers reducing visibility to less than 2 miles. Most pilots would have refused a flight, but the patient's condition was critical. "It's your call," Jack told her over the radio. "The weather's right at minimums, but this guy needs help fast. Can you handle it?" Sarah studied the current weather reports and forecasts, calculating the risks carefully. The flight would push her capabilities to their limit, but she believed she could complete it safely. "I can make it work," she replied. The flight to the logging camp took place in conditions that tested every aspect of Sarah's training. She flew at low altitude to stay below the cloud deck, navigating by pilotage and dead reckoning when GPS signals became unreliable. Snow squalls reduced visibility to near zero at times, forcing her to slow her airspeed and rely on instruments. When she landed at the remote strip, the logging crew was waiting with the injured worker. He had suffered severe lacerations from a chainsaw accident and was losing blood rapidly. As they loaded him into the aircraft, Sarah realized that his survival depended entirely on her ability to complete the return flight safely and quickly. The flight back to Fairbanks was even more challenging than the outbound leg. The injured man's condition was deteriorating, and the weather was getting worse. Sarah pushed the aircraft to its maximum safe cruise speed while maintaining precise control in turbulent conditions. Her radio communications with air traffic control were calm and professional despite the life-or-death nature of the situation. When she finally landed at Fairbanks and watched the ambulance crew take over the patient's care, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had successfully completed a mission that many experienced pilots would have declined, proving that her training and judgment were equal to Alaska's demands. Word of her successful emergency flight spread quickly through the Alaskan aviation community. Other pilots began to take notice of the young woman who was handling difficult assignments with skill and composure beyond her years. However, not all attention was positive. During a routine cargo flight to a fishing village on the Yukon River, Sarah encountered her first serious case of workplace harassment. The village's airport manager, a middle-aged man named Carl Henderson, made inappropriate comments about her appearance and suggested that she was only employed because of affirmative action policies. "I don't know what Jack was thinking, hiring a little girl for this job," Henderson said as they unloaded supplies. "This is man's work. You should be back home having babies, not pretending to be a pilot." Sarah's face burned with anger, but she maintained her professionalism. "My flying record speaks for itself," she replied evenly. "I'm here to do a job, and I intend to do it well." Henderson's harassment continued throughout her stay at the village, including attempts to interfere with her pre-flight preparations and spreading rumors about her competence to other community members. When she reported the incident to Jack Patterson, his response was disappointingly dismissive. "Henderson's an old-timer," Jack said. "He's set in his ways, but he's harmless. You need to develop thicker skin if you're going to succeed in this business." The incident highlighted the ongoing challenges Sarah faced as a woman in a male-dominated industry. Despite her proven abilities and growing reputation for reliability, she continued to encounter individuals who questioned her presence in professional aviation. The psychological toll of constant scrutiny and occasional harassment was significant, but Sarah refused to let it deter her from pursuing her goals. Her breakthrough came during the winter when Alaska experienced one of the worst weather patterns in decades. Temperatures dropped to 50 below zero, and wind conditions grounded most aircraft throughout the state. Several remote communities were running low on essential supplies, and normal transportation methods were impossible. Sarah volunteered for a series of emergency supply flights that other pilots considered too dangerous to attempt. The destinations included villages accessible only by frozen river landings, where mistaken approach or touchdown could result in breaking through the ice. She spent hours calculating weight and balance requirements, studying ice conditions, and planning emergency escape routes. The flights required exceptional skill in extreme conditions. Sarah had to land on surfaces she couldn't see clearly, navigate in visibility reduced to a few hundred feet, and operate aircraft systems that were stressed by temperatures well beyond normal limits. She completed 7 successful flights over 3 days, delivering food, medicine, and heating fuel to communities that would have faced serious hardship without assistance. Her performance during the emergency operation earned respect from even the most skeptical members of Alaska's aviation community. Pilots who had previously dismissed her because of her age and gender began to recognize her as a skilled and reliable professional. Jack Patterson, who had initially been reluctant to assign her challenging flights, started giving her the most demanding routes in the company schedule. "You've proven yourself," he told her after a particularly difficult winter flight. "I'll admit I had my doubts when I hired you, but you've shown that you can handle anything Alaska throws at you." The acknowledgement felt good, but Sarah knew that respect in aviation had to be earned continuously. Each flight was an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities or a chance to make a mistake that could undo months of building credibility. She approached every assignment with the same meticulous preparation and professional execution that had characterized her flying from the beginning. As her second year in Alaska progressed, Sarah began taking on increasingly complex assignments. She flew geological survey missions that required precise navigation through unmapped terrain. She transported critical medical personnel to remote emergency sites. She participated in search and rescue operations that tested her ability to spot tiny targets in vast wilderness areas. Each successful mission added to her growing reputation as one of Alaska's most capable pilots. However, she had no way of knowing that her ultimate test was approaching, a rescue mission that would challenge every skill she had developed and force her to risk everything to save the lives of strangers trapped in impossible conditions. The stage was set for a confrontation between Sarah's abilities and Alaska's most dangerous weather, a battle that would either establish her as a legendary pilot or end her career forever. The weather forecast that arrived on Sarah's desk on the morning of March 15th read like a pilot's nightmare. A massive Arctic storm system was approaching Alaska from the northwest, bringing with it wind gusts exceeding 80 miles per hour, temperatures dropping to 60 below zero, and snow accumulations that would make ground transportation impossible for days. The National Weather Service had issued warnings advising all aircraft to remain grounded until the system passed. Sarah studied the meteorological data with growing concern. The storm was larger and more intense than anything she had experienced during her 3 years of flying in Alaska. Satellite imagery showed a swirling mass of clouds and precipitation that covered nearly half the state, with particularly severe conditions expected in the remote mountain regions where many of her regular destinations were located. By noon, Fairbanks International Airport had officially closed to all but emergency operations. Commercial flights were canceled, private aircraft were securely tied down in hangars, and even the most experienced bush pilots were grounded. The aviation weather briefing room, normally bustling with activity, was nearly empty as pilots waited for the storm to pass. Sarah spent the afternoon at Northwind Aviation's hangar, performing maintenance tasks and reviewing weather updates. The storm's intensity continued to build, with surface winds at remote weather stations already exceeding 50 miles per hour. Snow was falling so heavily that visibility at many locations had dropped to zero. At approximately 6:30 p.m., the emergency call came in. The Alaska State Troopers received a distress signal from a stranded hiking group on Mount McKinley, the highest peak in North America. 12 experienced mountaineers had been caught above the tree line when the storm arrived ahead of schedule, and they were now trapped in conditions that made descent impossible. The group's leader, Dr. Michael Chun, was an emergency room physician from Seattle who had organized the expedition as a fundraising effort for a children's hospital. His radio transmission, barely audible through the storm interference, painted a desperate picture. 3 members of his team were showing signs of severe hypothermia, and their shelter was failing under the assault of hurricane-force winds. "We need immediate evacuation." Dr. Chen's voice crackled through the radio static. "We have adequate food and water for another 12 hours, but we won't survive the night if this wind doesn't stop. Our coordinates are approximately 6 miles northeast of the 14,000-foot base camp." The Alaska Rescue Coordination Center immediately began searching for available aircraft and pilots willing to attempt a rescue mission. However, the storm conditions had grounded every helicopter and fixed-wing aircraft in the region. Even the military rescue units, equipped with the most advanced aircraft and experienced crews, had determined that the weather made flight operations impossible. Sarah was monitoring the emergency frequencies when she heard the increasingly desperate radio calls from the rescue coordinators. Each passing hour reduced the survival chances of the stranded mountaineers, but no pilot was willing to risk their life in conditions that exceeded all safe flying limits. At 9:15 p.m., the situation became critical. Dr. Chin reported that 1 member of his team had lost consciousness from hypothermia, and 2 others were showing signs of severe frostbite. Their makeshift shelter had been damaged by the wind, and they were rapidly losing body heat. Without immediate rescue, the entire group would likely perish before morning. Sarah sat in her apartment, listening to the storm howl outside her windows, knowing that 12 lives hung in the balance just a few hundred miles away. Every instinct told her that flying in these conditions was suicide. Wind speeds at the mountain were exceeding 100 miles per hour, visibility was 0, and temperatures were so low that aircraft systems could fail without warning. But she also knew that she possessed a combination of skills and experience that might make the impossible rescue attempt feasible. Her extensive training in mountain flying, emergency procedures, and severe weather operations had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. More importantly, she had the specialized equipment and aircraft modifications necessary for high-altitude operations in extreme cold. At 10:30 p.m., Sarah made the decision that would define her career and possibly end her life. She called the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center and volunteered for the mission. "Are you certain about this?" asked Commander Robert Hayes, the rescue coordinator. "We've had 6 pilots turn down this mission. The weather conditions are beyond anything we normally consider flyable." Sarah's voice was steady and confident. "I understand the risks, Commander, but I have the experience and equipment necessary to reach those people. They're going to die if someone doesn't try." The rescue coordination required careful planning and backup support from multiple agencies. Sarah would fly her specially modified Cessna 185, equipped with high-altitude performance upgrades, emergency medical supplies, and advanced navigation equipment. Ground teams would be positioned at the nearest accessible locations to provide support if she was forced to make an emergency landing. The aircraft she would use for the mission was nicknamed Arctic Angel, a testament to its role in previous emergency operations. The plane had been modified with extended-range fuel tanks, cold-weather engine preparations, and specialized landing gear designed for operations on snow and rough terrain. More importantly, it carried advanced GPS navigation equipment that could function even when visual references were impossible. As Sarah prepared for the flight, she reviewed every aspect of the mission planning. The route would take her through mountain passes where wind speeds could exceed the aircraft's maximum operating limits. She would have to navigate using instruments alone, as visual contact with the ground would be impossible throughout most of the flight. The mathematical calculations were sobering. Her fuel supply would allow approximately 4 hours of flight time, including the journey to the rescue site and return to Fairbanks. This left virtually no margin for error or extended search operations. She would have one opportunity to locate the stranded mountaineers and execute a successful rescue. Weather conditions at her departure point were already at the limits of safe flight operations. Wind gusts were approaching 40 miles per hour, snow was falling heavily, and visibility was less than half a mile. Most pilots would have considered these conditions sufficient reason to cancel the flight even before considering the more severe weather at the rescue site. At 11:45 p.m., Sarah completed her final pre-flight inspection of Arctic Angel. The aircraft systems were functioning normally despite the extreme cold, and all emergency equipment was properly secured. She had loaded additional survival gear, medical supplies, and communication equipment that might be needed during the rescue operation. Her radio call to air traffic control was received with surprise and concern. "Arctic Angel, are you sure about this?" asked the controller. "We show severe weather along your entire route. Winds at your destination are exceeding 80 knots with zero visibility." "Roger that," Sarah replied. "I understand the conditions. This is an emergency rescue mission with 12 lives at stake. Request immediate clearance for departure." The tower controller, recognizing the desperate nature of the situation, granted clearance while expressing his concerns about the flight's safety. "Arctic Angel, you're cleared for takeoff. Please maintain continuous radio contact and exercise extreme caution. We'll have emergency services standing by for your return." As Sarah taxied toward the runway, she could feel the wind attempting to push the aircraft sideways despite her careful control inputs. The snowfall was so heavy that her landing lights barely penetrated more than a few feet ahead of the aircraft. Every indication suggested that the flight was beyond the limits of safe aviation practices. But 12 people were dying on a mountaintop, and she was their only hope for survival. As the engine reached takeoff power and Arctic Angel accelerated down the runway, Sarah committed herself to a mission that would test every skill she had developed during her aviation career. The takeoff was the most challenging she had ever attempted. Crosswinds required constant correction, and the aircraft's climb rate was reduced by the density-altitude effects of the cold, thin air. As she penetrated the cloud layer, visibility dropped to zero, forcing her to rely entirely on instruments for navigation and attitude control. The weather radar showed massive precipitation cells directly along her planned route, areas of turbulence, and wind shear that could destroy an aircraft in seconds. Sarah began making course adjustments, searching for gaps in the storm system that might allow safe passage toward the rescue site. As Arctic Angel climbed toward its cruising altitude, Sarah realized that she was embarking on the most dangerous flight of her career, a mission that would either save 12 lives or claim 13. The storm was waiting, and there was no turning back. Arctic Angel climbed through the storm at 3:47 a.m., its engine struggling against air, so turbulent that Sarah was thrown against her restraint harness with each violent updraft and downdraft. The aircraft's instruments flickered as ice began forming on the pitot tubes, threatening to disable the airspeed indicators that were crucial for maintaining control in these conditions. Outside the cockpit windows, the world had disappeared into a writhing mass of snow and darkness. The navigation lights reflected off the swirling precipitation, creating a disorienting strobe effect that made instrument flying even more challenging. Sarah forced herself to focus entirely on the flight instruments, ignoring the violent motion of the aircraft as she maintained course toward the mountain rescue site. "Arctic Angel, Fairbanks approach," came the radio call through heavy static. "How are you handling the weather conditions up there?" Sarah's voice remained calm, despite the aircraft being tossed around like a toy. "Moderate to severe turbulence, heavy snow, and building ice." Aircraft systems are functioning normally. Estimate reaching the search area in 37 minutes. What she didn't mention was that the GPS navigation system was becoming unreliable due to the storm's electromagnetic interference. She was increasingly dependent on dead reckoning and her knowledge of the mountain terrain to locate the stranded hiking group. Missing the rescue site by even a few miles would make the mission impossible in these visibility conditions. As Arctic Angel approached the higher elevations of Mount McKinley, the true fury of the storm became apparent. Wind speeds exceeded 100 miles per hour, creating downdrafts that could slam an aircraft into the mountainside without warning. The temperature had dropped to minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause rapid mechanical failure in aircraft systems not designed for such extremes. Sarah began her descent toward the search area, fighting to maintain control as crosswinds tried to push the aircraft into the mountain peaks hidden somewhere in the darkness around her. She had memorized the terrain features and elevation profiles, but flying by instruments alone in such conditions required skills that few pilots possessed. At 4:31 a.m., she established radio contact with the stranded mountaineers. Dr. Chen's voice was weak and distorted by the storm, but his relief at hearing aircraft engines was unmistakable. Arctic Angel, this is Mountain Rescue Group. We can hear your engine, but visibility here is absolutely zero. We've been trying to mark our position with flares, but the wind is extinguishing them immediately. 3 of our team members are unconscious from hypothermia. Sarah began a systematic search pattern, flying precise rectangular courses while gradually descending toward the mountain surface. The search was extremely dangerous, as she had no visual reference to determine her exact altitude above the rapidly rising terrain. A miscalculation of even a few hundred feet could result in controlled flight into terrain. Mountain Rescue, can you generate any kind of signal? Sarah radioed. I need something to help me locate your exact position. Dr. Chen's response revealed the group's desperate situation. We're trying to use camera flashes and a small emergency strobe, but I'm not sure they're visible through this snow. Most of my team can't move at this point. We're losing people. Sarah made another pass through the search area, flying dangerously close to the mountain surface. On her 5th approach, she caught a brief glimpse of what appeared to be a flashing light approximately 2,000 feet below her current altitude. The signal disappeared almost immediately, but it gave her a target to investigate. The descent toward the signal required Sarah to perform one of the most dangerous maneuvers in aviation, a steep approach in zero visibility conditions over mountainous terrain. She reduced power and began a controlled descent, monitoring her instruments carefully to avoid stalling the aircraft while maintaining enough airspeed to handle the severe turbulence. At 1,800 feet above the signal's location, Arctic Angel broke through the bottom of the cloud layer for just a few seconds. Sarah saw the hiking group huddled against a rock formation, their orange emergency shelter barely visible against the white landscape. More importantly, she spotted a potential landing area approximately quarter-mile from their position. The landing site was far from ideal, a narrow snow-covered ledge with a steep drop-off on one side and rising terrain on the other. The surface conditions were unknown, and the crosswinds would make the approach extremely challenging. Most pilots would have considered the site too dangerous for a landing attempt. But Sarah had spent 3 years learning to land on marginal strips throughout Alaska. She had developed techniques for assessing surface conditions from the air and executing approaches in severe weather that would challenge even test pilots. This was exactly the type of flying she had been preparing for her entire career. Mountain Rescue, I've located a potential landing site approximately 400 yards from your position. I'm going to attempt a landing, but you need to be ready to move your team members immediately after I touch down. I won't be able to remain on the ground for more than a few minutes. Dr. Chen's voice reflected both hope and desperation. Understood. We'll get everyone ready to move. The 3 unconscious team members will need to be carried. Sarah began her final approach to the mountain landing site, fighting crosswinds that threatened to push Arctic Angel into the rock walls on either side of the narrow ledge. The aircraft's stall warning horn sounded intermittently as she balanced airspeed against the need for precise altitude control. The landing was the most technically demanding she had ever attempted. Touchdown occurred in a crosswind that required immediate correction to prevent the aircraft from sliding sideways off the narrow ledge. The snow surface was softer than anticipated, creating additional drag that helped slow the aircraft but also threatened to cause a nose-over if she applied too much brake pressure. Arctic Angel came to a stop with less than 50 feet of runway remaining before the ledge dropped away into a precipitous canyon. Sarah immediately began preparing for passenger loading while keeping the engine running to prevent it from freezing in the extreme temperature. The rescue operation moved with remarkable efficiency despite the harsh conditions. Dr. Chun and the conscious members of his team carried their unconscious companions to the aircraft, loading them into the cabin as quickly as possible. Sarah assisted by helping to arrange the passengers and ensuring that everyone was properly secured for the return flight. 12 souls on board, Dr. Chin reported as he climbed into the co-pilot's seat. 3 critical hypothermia cases, 2 with severe frostbite, but everyone's alive. The takeoff from a mountain ledge was even more challenging than the landing. The additional weight of 12 passengers reduced Arctic Angel's performance significantly, and the thin air at high altitude further degraded the aircraft's climb capability. Sarah used every available inch of the narrow runway, accepting risks that would normally be considered unacceptable. As the aircraft lifted off and began its descent toward lower altitudes, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and continuing concern. She had successfully rescued the stranded mountaineers, but the return flight would be conducted in the same severe weather conditions that had made the inbound journey so dangerous. The cabin behind her was quiet except for the sound of Dr. Chun providing medical care to his team members. Several passengers were experiencing varying degrees of hypothermia and frostbite, and one man's condition appeared critical. Sarah realized that the success of the rescue mission would ultimately depend on reaching medical facilities quickly enough to save the most seriously injured. Fairbanks approach, Arctic Angel returning from rescue site with 12 passengers on board. Request priority approach clearance and have emergency medical services standing by. We have multiple hypothermia casualties requiring immediate hospital transport. The return flight took 43 minutes through conditions that remained at the limits of safe aviation. Sarah fought continuous turbulence while monitoring her passengers' conditions and managing aircraft systems that were stressed by the extreme operating environment. Ice continued to accumulate on the aircraft's surfaces, requiring her to use anti-ice systems carefully to prevent power loss while maintaining control. As Arctic Angel descended through the cloud layers toward Fairbanks, Sarah caught her first glimpse of the airport's approach lights through the swirling snow. The sight represented safety and successful completion of a mission that many had considered impossible. The landing at Fairbanks International Airport was smooth and professional despite the continuing storm conditions. Emergency vehicles were waiting as promised, and the transfer of passengers to medical care was accomplished quickly and efficiently. Within minutes of touchdown, the most seriously injured mountaineers were being transported to the hospital where specialized hypothermia treatment was available. As Sarah completed her post-flight inspection of Arctic Angel, she was surrounded by rescue personnel, airport officials, and members of the media who had learned about the dramatic rescue mission. The aircraft showed signs of its harrowing journey, with ice damage to several antenna systems and stress marks where severe turbulence had tested the airframe's limits. Commander Robert Hayes from the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center approached Sarah as she finished securing the aircraft. "That was the most impressive piece of flying I've witnessed in 30 years of rescue operations," he said. "You saved 12 lives tonight under conditions that grounded every other pilot in the state." The rescue mission's impact extended far beyond the immediate saving of lives. Within hours, news of Sarah's flight had spread throughout the global aviation community, generating recognition for her exceptional skill and courage. Aviation magazines featured detailed analyses of the mission, highlighting the advanced techniques and judgment required to complete such a rescue successfully. More importantly for Sarah's career, the mission definitively established her reputation as one of Alaska's premier pilots. The discrimination and skepticism she had faced throughout her aviation career were finally silenced by a demonstration of capability that could not be questioned or dismissed. Major airlines and charter operations began approaching Sarah with job offers, recognizing that her specialized skills and proven performance under extreme conditions made her an invaluable asset. However, she chose to remain in Alaska, where her expertise in challenging flying conditions could continue to serve communities and individuals who depended on aviation for critical services. The 12 people she rescued that night went on to make significant contributions to their communities. Dr. Chun expanded his emergency medicine program and credited the rescue experience with reinforcing his commitment to serving others in crisis situations. Several team members became advocates for mountain safety and search and rescue funding. Sarah's story became a powerful example of how perseverance, skill, and courage could overcome discrimination and doubt. Young women considering careers in aviation pointed to her achievements as proof that gender was irrelevant when it came to flying ability and professional competence. Years later, when aviation historians documented the most significant rescue missions in Alaskan history, Sarah's March 15th flight consistently ranked among the most technically demanding and successfully executed operations ever recorded. The mission demonstrated that exceptional flying skill, combined with careful preparation and unwavering determination, could triumph over seemingly impossible conditions. The woman who had once been dismissed as too emotional to fly had proven that emotion, when channeled into compassion and commitment to saving lives, could motivate achievements that redefined the boundaries of what was possible in aviation. Her story inspired a new generation of pilots who understood that true greatness in flying came not from avoiding challenges, but from developing the skills and courage necessary to face them successfully when lives depended on their abilities.